Hello friends alike, and welcome to an extreme episode of Train Sim News. That's right, this episode is extreme and is better than a normal Train Sim News episode because it's extreme. I'm sponsored by Little. Actually, no, I'm not really sponsored by Little, but yeah, I'm extreme, isn't it, bruv? The reason why I'm speaking in such a clear and coherent MLG Pro Speaker Sun Dolby Digital voice is because we need to celebrate the release of Train Simulator 2016. For as we all know, Train Simulator is extreme, and if you can't handle the extreme, then you go back to playing Dota 2 or You know what? This isn't working. I need to get my old mic back. Back in a second.
Right, no more distortion, gain is fine, everything else is fine, all audio levels are equalized. Oh yeah, we need to say hello there everybody and welcome to episode 16 of Train Sim News, blah blah blah. About the intro, you might have already guessed that it was made to celebrate the release of Train Sim 2016. And it's actually kind of odd because I'm recording this episode way in advance. I'll write up my opinions about it on my Steam group, but don't worry, you don't have to be a member to view it. I'll post a link to it in the description of this video. Oh, one last thing in regards to the intro. I was actually going to use a more suggestive image of Terry, specifically this one. And the reason why I didn't bother using it is because it's really hard to edit when you have something that turns you on staring you in the face. Yes, I know I'm weird, now swiftly moving on. So in this episode of the Train Sim News Show, we're going to focus on a single topic: multiplayer. Is it possible for multiplayer to be added into Train Simulator? However, before I can start my detailed analysis about if multiplayer could work and my ideas and stuff, we need to watch a very special video uploaded by Dovetail. Now the video that I have here, which I downloaded from Dovetail way back in 2013, and even then they uploaded it sometime in 2009 or 2010, so it's a really old video. It's called First Look Technology Update. I can guarantee that quite a lot of you people wouldn't even know that this video existed. They deleted it sometime in 2014, I think, when they were refreshing their channel. I can't remember, maybe 2013, but I did manage to archive it, and I can upload it as a full mirror if anybody wants to. It is in 360p, so I apologise about the quality, but the quality really isn't that important. Let's go right ahead into showcasing this video then. I'm going to commentate over this video here because there is no sound, and even then, sound really isn't that important to deal with regards to what they're going to be showcasing to us. So the first thing that they're showing us here is the block asset tool, which is something that actually has been implemented into Train Simulator, the route editor at least. It's something that's really helpful for route builders, especially me and my fellow comrades who are building my routes. You know, for adding forests and dense areas like houses and stuff. They've slightly updated it now so you can add more content to it, but it's a really good feature. The next thing that they're showcasing here is the terrain editor, which, or I wouldn't really say terrain editor, it's mainly like a feature, but I really hate using the terrain editor, to be honest. Just in general, it doesn't really feel that nice to use. I think it could have been fleshed out a bit more. The next thing that they're showcasing is something that I think has been implemented. It's something to do with regards to lighting. I was a bit confused, but like I said, we have the TS2012 lighting. Yes, it's been around for that long, and it's much better than the one that they're showcasing here. The shadows look more realistic, and the night sky looks a bit better, but other than that, yeah. And the final thing that they're showcasing here is multiplayer. Well, a basic form of multiplayer, to be honest. As you can clearly see there, there's a marker above that train, and it's basically showcasing, you know, two people with two different trains on the same route simultaneously. A basic form of multiplayer that they managed to pull off back in the early days of Railworks. And we're talking early days of Railworks. Look how old that 165 model is. So that was the very old and archived video from Dovetail's channel that I showed you, and the reason I showed you that video was to prove that multiplayer has shown to work in Train Simulator. Now, for my analysis, I'm going to split this video up into sections, and I'm going to discuss of how I would implement multiplayer, and the features and ways to update it, and keep it fresh. These are my ideas about multiplayer, and I'll also take into consideration of some of the comments that people have left me about multiplayer on my Steam group. But other than that, well, let's just go straight into our discussion. Multiplayer would be able to be selected on the main menu, let's say about here, on another icon that says Train Sim Online, for example. It will not be forced onto the player, so the only benefit that you will lose by not playing this game in multiplayer is not being able to play multiplayer. This is important because we cannot assure that every single person who plays this game will enjoy multiplayer. And then again, why should multiplayer be forced on every single player? That's not fair at all. Once you've selected multiplayer on the menu, you then will be taken to a sort of lobby-esque page, very similar to FSX or TF2 when you want to select what kind of server you want to go on. However, if you don't want to connect to the Steam servers, that's perfectly fine. You'll be able to create your own server or create a LAN and run it through Hamachi, for example. I haven't actually used that for ages, but still, I think something could be worked around that. You should give players these options, just in case they don't want to use a sort of default system that may or may not work properly. Another thing to mention here, once you've logged into multiplayer and stuff, you'll also be able to access your multiplayer profile, which would be much better than the current one that you have for career mode. Oh no, it also won't have any of that experience point rubbish. There's no reason to have experience points for multiplayer. In this profile, you'll be able to see the types of trains that you like to drive the most, the routes that you drive on the most, the total miles you've driven, and other important things like how many times you've been caught speeding, how many spats you've had, or if you've had any derailments, for example. It'll log those things up. Everybody will be able to see your progress on multiplayer, but even then, that's not much of a big problem if you think about it. It will also show your Steam profile picture, which, in my case, is a tortured Sylveon. One of the things I was thinking about, which I thought would be a good idea to implement, would be different ways of driving or even playing the game on multiplayer. Because if you just got 30 or 40 people on one server on one route, driving similar types of trains on similar types of services, it would get boring really quickly, even if you had the odd freight or charter train. So I sat down for a while and I came up with a few more ideas on how Train Sim could be played in multiplayer. And these are as follows: being a driver, being a guard, being a fireman in the steam locomotive, or being a signaller. I shall go through all of these individually. Being a driver is fairly self-explanatory. One could say you're just playing a game as you normally would on single player, but with a few differences. If you are driving a passenger train, depending on the type of train that you're driving, or the type of route that you're actually driving on, you will be driving your train in either one of two modes: driver only operated, or driving with the assistance of a guard. We'll get onto the guard later. Driver only operation isn't as complex as you think. I mean, if you've driven the class 321 and 456 from the Armstrong Powerhouse, and used the driver only operation thing there, it's pretty much like that. So it's not exactly that complex. The only difference would be it'll be implemented onto other trains like the 375, 378, etc, etc. If you haven't driven either of those two trains, then to put it simply, driver only operation is where the driver has control over the doors. He or she would release the doors, and then once everyone has boarded, they would close the doors. Contrast this to driver and guard operation, in which the driver does not have control over the doors. Instead, the guard opens and closes the doors. It should be also noted that the guard, which in this case would be another player, would either have their own passenger view or be sitting in the rear cab of the train, depending on the type of train that they're operating in. The reason why I think implementing this system into multiplayer would be a good idea is because it adds a legitimate form of cooperation and, to an extent, a real skill ceiling in Train Simulator. If you don't cooperate with your guards, or if the guard doesn't cooperate with the driver, you're not going to complete your service. That, or you're going to have a really hard time doing so. And before anybody asks, yes, I would add the feature to allow people to communicate using microphones or headsets. I'm not that cruel. To an extent, a very similar thing would apply for being a fireman on a steam train. Take me, for example. When I'm driving a steam train on Train Simulator, I always turn the automatic fireman on. It's not because I'm lazy. Okay, it's a tiny bit because I'm lazy, but mostly because, can you really blame me? The driver drives the train, whilst the fireman keeps the fire going. The driver does not do both of those things at the same time, unless it's on a small steam train, for example. Can you imagine doing both tasks on a steam train like, oh, I don't know, the Iron Horsehouse Duchess? Or as I like to call it, Wheel Slip Simulator 2015? Oh, come on, guys, don't be in denial. That thing slips more than a Nissan GTR on an ice sheet. So, as you can probably make out there, being a fireman in a steam locomotive or multiplayer, you'll be pretty much assisting the driver, and it requires a lot of cooperation, unless you are planning on blowing up another steam locomotive. Now, the last way I propose of playing multiplayer would be almost a completely different experience of Train Simulator, being a signalman. Now, whilst I like my episodes being long, I refuse to go into detail about the principles of railway signalling, etc, etc. Instead, I'll just link you to some really informative videos in the description, as well as a few websites that may be able to help you if you don't know much about railway signalling. Surprisingly, my inspiration for this idea in particular came from FSX and its multiplayer regards to air traffic control, and I'll show you a video from YouTube showcasing this multiplayer right now. It will be shown sort of as a benchmark for what I propose.
Virgin 478, good evening to you, sir. Birmingham QNH 1013. Post your flight intentions in the chat box and I'll copy you when I'm ready to issue you your clearance.
Also QNH 1013.
Okay, I'm just going to confirm you with first Virgin 478. Is it alright for you to track a VOR initially before you start to perform the circuit? Right, okay then, Virgin 478, you are cleared on the VFR circuit as filed from Birmingham's runway 33. After departure, frequency will be 118.3. Initial climb at 5,000. And you'll be tracking the Trent VOR, which is Trent 3 Delta, from runway 33 at Birmingham. And if you can squawk for me, please, 7020.
As you could probably tell, those were just portions. The full video will be linked in the description. Now, don't worry, I do know that being a signaller on a railway and air traffic control are two different jobs, but at the same time, they do have very similar roles. If you think about it. You can't really control an airport safely these days without some form of air traffic control, and there is no way you're going to control the lines where I live without some form of signalling. Oh, by the way, Southwest Trains, if you are watching, put 12-car trains on the Windsor line, goddammit! Sorry. Anyway, as I was saying, signals are pretty damn important for a railway to function, so it would make a lot of sense to introduce the ability for people to control the signals, you know, be the signalman, and also be able to communicate to drivers via radio, you know, the cab secure radio, for example. Not only will this add a true skill ceiling to Train Simulator, but also it's a new way to play this game that isn't reliant on a gimmick. Not to mention, it'll give the kids who constantly play career mode and think that's too extreme for them, an insight on what it's like to work on the railway in a different sector, you could almost call it. Speaking of kids, isn't that a perfect segue to what people mentioned when I was talking about multiplayer on my Steam group? The trolls. You know who I'm talking about. If anyone's been on FSX Multiplayer back in the day, let's say about what, 60% of the servers were filled with kids who really didn't know how to even take off a plane, and they just ruin everything for everybody else. Now for me, this has been really tricky to work out what kind of system that could be implemented on multiplayer to prevent trolling and griefing. There's not really going to be any griefing or hacking, to be honest. This is a train simulator, not TF2. But even looking at some of the suggestions on the Steam group, the one with the 5-minute rule to kick people who are idle, yeah, that one's fine, I'll agree with that. TF2 has that, I think. Well, most servers on TF2 have that, I think. After a while of thinking, the closest system which I got to being viable would be a voting system, which again, TF2 already has, so as long as it's implemented just like that, it should be okay. So, that was my analysis on multiplayer. And, alright, I'm gonna be honest here, okay? I'm gonna just be outright honest with you guys. If multiplayer was shoved onto this game right now, the game would do this. Think about it for a second. The game itself is already very intensive and is very unstable in its own right. And you're going to add a game mode which will make the game even more more unstable and more intensive, even if you only have about 20 people on a server. Not to mention the game's business model regards to DLC even plays a part regards to multiplayer. What if you don't own all the DLC? Like, for example, what if somebody owns the 319 and someone else on the server doesn't? What happens? Am I just gonna see a bunch of 377s everywhere? I mean, that's hardly realistic. You know what? I've just come up with a good quote regards to the Train Simulator business model. Listen. The Train Simulator business model is designed to benefit two kinds of people: stupid rich people and stupidly rich people. Not to mention, what about routes? Most of the routes that Dovetail are selling are very linear. London to Brighton, London to Faversham springs to mind. Because of that, players will be severely limited on what kind of services they can do. I can only get so much enjoyment driving from London to Brighton and Brighton to London back again so many times, you know? So if you were to come up and ask me and say, hey Daniel, do you think multiplayer could ever work on Train Simulator? Currently, no way, not at all. However, if this terrible business model is abolished and the game is fixed, hell yeah, bring on multiplayer. But for the time being, no. Dovetail, stay away from multiplayer until you get this game fixed. Alright? Good. Well, I'm finally finished. I apologise for this episode being later than usual. I've been very busy. And also, they changed my college timetable and it's just abysmal in every single way, shape and form. But hey, you can't really do much about it these days. Well, that's all I got for you on this episode. Thank you very much for watching and I'll speak to you guys next time. Goodbye!